Hello, Jackson. You fucking turd. Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the brand new setup that I finally got off my ass to get around and actually set up. This is how things are going to be done from now on, so you don't have to watch me go back into my kitchen whenever I need to get some more burp fuel. Speaking of which, got some right here, my brand new Super Dad mug that my lovely wife got me. Today, me and good old Trevor boy.
Howdy, everybody. It's a good thing we don't have to see the behind the scenes of where the burp fuel come from.
The corner.
The corner, as we call it, yeah. Today, we will be discussing a very, very, very special movie. One that is it is a rare case. Well, we've had a couple of these lately, but a very rare case where we're reviewing a movie that is so by and large loved that for once we agree. More so with me than Trev, but Trev's catching up. Just give him some time. Today we will be discussing 1991's new setup, and I'm still not even got my shit all together. Ugh. You asshole. Fuck it. Terminator 2, directed, of course, by James Cameron. So, Trev, what's your history with this?
Yeah, so following up on what I was saying yesterday, my dad used to watch the first two movies a whole lot. He got the special edition DVDs that came out in the early 2000s, and I remember watching bits and pieces of those and being intrigued. But it was really whenever Terminator 3 came out in 2003, that's whenever, kind of like with how Alien versus Predator finally got me to sit down and watch the Alien and Predator movies in full. Terminator 3 is what motivated me to be like, I want to watch the first two Terminators in full. And, I explained how the first Terminator was kind of a fragmented experience for a little bit, but Terminator 2 was one that I saw in full right off the bat, both the theatrical version and the special edition. And
which will be the edition that we are reviewing today. I refuse to acknowledge the theatrical cut, like with Aliens.
And fortunately, on my DVD and maybe also on the Blu-rays that have come out since then, there's actually a slightly longer version of the special edition, which actually I think puts in all the deleted scenes, including the scene where the T-1000 creepily investigates John's room, and also the original ending for the movie, which was basically probably the happiest ending you could give a Terminator movie. But unfortunately, my Blu-ray player doesn't have a keypad, so I can't enter the code to watch that version. So those scenes will have to remain deleted. But I digress. The special edition, kind of like with any of Cameron's movies where he has a special edition, like Aliens or The Abyss. The Abyss I can't comment on because I've never seen it. But especially with Aliens and T2, the special editions are the better versions of the movie.
And Avatar.
I haven't seen this longer version of Avatar yet, but I want to. I guess maybe when the sequel comes out, I'll be ready. But anyway, so Terminator 2. This is one of those movies that my dad would talk to whenever we were watching it. He would be so engaged that he would be talking at certain moments, and that always stuck out to me as being funny. I sometimes make the joke that white trash do that, but I'm only joking whenever I say that. I talk to their TVs.
Get this version. If you want to watch the extended cut of Avatar, get this box set.
Yeah, I've seen that. That cover in particular, because I think that's like the only cover for the special edition. I've heard about it. It sounds really good. Kind of reminds me of what Jackson did with his King Kong, but maybe without less filler. I don't know, but yeah. So T2, ladies and gentlemen, listen. This is an iconic '90s film, an iconic film in general. So I've I've seen this a fair share. I mean, the first three movies, I actually came to the revelation after watching T2 in preparation for this review. Even though there's fair stretches of time in between the first three movies, I consider these first three Terminator movies to be the classics. Rise of the Machines is kind of the farthest removed, but it still has that feel where I noticed that with the later movies, starting with Salvation on, there's a lot of homage going on with those movies. T3, even if it kind of repeats the formula of this one, it actually tries to progress the story. So, long story short on that, I just get a great trilogy feel from these first three movies, and it kind of dawned on me. Like I said with our ranking video, T3 kind of bugged me because I felt it kind of started dipping into parody. T2, I'll be honest, I didn't have a problem with this movie whenever I was originally watching it. Whenever I was younger, I mean, I just watched it along with T1 and T3. Really, what started it, and I feel like I have to explain myself because I have given the impression that I dislike this movie a lot, but that's not the case. Really, what it was is, again, the fandom. The fandom, understandably, this movie is beloved for good reason. But unfortunately, sometimes the fandom has a way of expressing that where it kind of taints the product, or it did for me for a little bit. And the main thing was that I felt like everything that came after this wasn't being given a fair shot. But I've come to realize I shouldn't let that attitude hurt my perception of the film, because it is great, as we're going to elaborate on. And to wrap up the history, I mean, I've seen this lots and lots of times. I kind of fell out of favor with it as I was trying to get at here, but I think I've finally come around. As I was joking with Nick, I said I was under the weather, and T2 and T3 weren't bothering me quite as much. And I'm also starting to like zombies, so maybe I'm having some kind of enlightenment. So anyway, go for it, Nick.
Oh boy, Terminator 2. I have such a long history with this movie. It's not even funny. As I stated yesterday, Terminator 2 is one of 8 or 9 movies that I remember watching like in loop when I was a child. You can even talk to my dad. Actually, no, it's about 10 because there's a Disney movie thrown in there too. Hercules, yes. To reiterate once again, so Hercules, Star Wars Episode 5 and 6 and 1, Jim Carrey's The Mask, the 1999 remake of The Mummy, True Lies, Terminator 2, Godzilla 1998, and Small Soldiers, yes. I would watch these movies all the time when I was a child.
That's quite a pack.
And I think the number one... Oh, and Jurassic Park, too. I think the number one movie that I rewatched was Terminator 2, specifically the theatrical cut. And I mentioned that for Revelation later. So I just loved the fuck out of Terminator 2. I would watch it in loop again and again and again and again and again. It would drive my mom nuts. I just fucking loved this movie. This movie was my life. So much so that I wanted to be the Terminator so badly. I would wear sunglasses. I'd slick my hair back. I'd wear dark clothes and pretend I was the Terminator. As you can see, not much has changed. A few years went by, and my dad married my stepmom, and I noticed in her movie collection that she's also a Terminator fan. She had the second movie. She specifically had the T2 Extreme DVD. So I popped it in, and because I wanted to watch Terminator 2. And then I noticed all these brand new scenes, and my mind was absolutely blown away. I think that was the very first time, aside from the Lord of the Rings movies, because those all have extended cuts, This was the first time I'd ever seen a extended version of a movie I'd seen previous, and it just absolutely blew me away. I felt like I was watching a brand new film. And since then, I've rewatched this movie, no joke, probably 100 times, to say the least. You just hear people talk about that all the time, like, oh, I've done this 100 times, or I've seen this 100 times. No exaggeration when I say I've seen Terminator 2 at least 100 times. Same with the first Terminator film as well, but definitely T2 is the one of the entire Terminator franchise I've seen the very most. I adore this movie, and I'm not jumping on the bandwagon. I don't give a shit about the bandwagon. I don't give a shit about the fan base. I adore this movie, and I consider this to be like one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. James Cameron, man, he makes good movies.
I concur.
Stephen McKinney asks me, what if Star Wars and Aliens had a crossover? First of all, you need to work on your grammar. Second of all, that'd be an interesting crossover because that's like the two polar opposites of sci-fi coming together into one.
I thought they did in Dark Horse, or at least there's some fan art out there. I know there's a fan art of Darth Vader facing off with a Xenomorph Queen.
I'm pretty sure that's fan art.
Yeah.
I think that'd be cool. I'd like to see Darth Vader slaughtering a whole horde of xenomorphs. Moving on. So, shall we get into the plot of Terminator 2, or is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, let's get into it.
Alrighty. In 1995, 9 years after the events of the first film, so John isn't even 10 years old in this movie?
It's actually 11, Nick, because the first one was 84.
So right. Duh.
Yeah.
See, I know math. So he is 10. Okay. I've heard a lot of different opinions. Like Terminator 3 says he was 13. The commentary for T2 says he's 12. But then here it says he's 10. Which is it?
I think I know why T3 said that, because they apparently, whoever wrote it was mainly remembering the 97 date. So they figured the movie took place in 97, because that's the only way 13 would work. But anyway.
In 1995, 10-year-old John Connor, played by Eddie Furlong, is living in Los Angeles with his foster parents. His mother, Sarah Connor, once again played by Linda Hamilton, had been preparing him throughout his childhood for his future role as the human resistance leader against Skynet, the artificial intelligence that will be given control of the United States nuclear missiles and initiate a nuclear holocaust August 29th, 1997, known thereafter as Judgment Day. As Sarah says in the opening narration, 3 billion human lives vanished on August 29th, 1997. The survivors would later call the war Judgment Day. They lived to face a new nightmare, a war against machines. Crunch. However, Sarah was arrested and imprisoned at a mental hospital after attempting to bomb a computer factory. In 2029, Skynet sends a new Terminator designated as the T-1000, played by Robert Patrick, back in time to kill John. The T-1000 is an advanced prototype made out of mimetic polyalloy liquid metal that gives it the ability to take on the shape and appearance of almost anything it touches and to transform its arms into blades and other shapes at will, basically making it a nanoborg.
But only things of equal size.
No, only an object of equal size. Can't form complex machines. Guns and explosives have chemicals, moving parts. Doesn't work that way, but it can form solid metal shapes. Like what? Knives, stabbing weapons. The T-1000 arrives, kills a police officer, butt-ass naked, and assumes his identity. He also uses the police computer to track down John. Meanwhile, the future John Connor has sent back a reprogrammed Model 101 Terminator to protect his younger self. Of course, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. The Terminator and the T-1000 converge on John in a shopping mall, and a chase ensues, after which John and the Terminator escape together on a motorcycle, bad to the bone. Fearing that the T-1000 will kill Sarah in order to get him, John orders the Terminator to help free her after discovering that the Terminator must follow his orders. That's one of my mission parameters. They encounter Sarah as she is escaping from the hospital, although she is initially reluctant to trust the Model 101. After the trio escape from the T-1000 in a police car, the Terminator informs John and Sarah about Skynet's history. Sarah learns that the man most directly responsible is Miles Bennett Dyson for Skynet's creation, a Cyberdyne systems engineer working on a revolutionary new microprocessor that will form the basis for Skynet. Sarah gathers weapons from an old friend and plans to flee with John to Mexico. Flee! But after having a nightmare about about Judgment Day, she instead sets out to kill Dyson in order to prevent Judgment Day from occurring, which would not happen if X-Men Days of Future Past has taught me anything. It would probably just speed up the process.
Yeah.
Finding him at his home, she wounds him, but finds herself unable to kill him in front of his family, and is at this point in the movie where she low-key stops being kind of unlikable. They learned that much of his research had been reverse engineered from the damaged CPU from the right arm of the previous Terminator who attacked Sarah back in 1984. For those of you who don't know, reverse engineering is a process or method through the application of which one attempts to understand through deductive reasoning how a device, process, system, or piece of software accomplishes a task with very little insight on exactly how it does it. Kind of a process of taking something apart, studying each aspect of it, and then learning how each part works. Convincing him that these items and his designs must be destroyed, they break into the Cyberdyne building, retrieve the CPU and the arm, and set explosives to destroy Dyson's lab. The police arrive and Dyson is fatally shot, but he rigs an improvised dead man switch that detonates the explosives when he dies. The T-1000 pursues their surviving trio, eventually cornering them in a steel mill. The T-1000 and the T-800 fight, and the more advanced model seriously damages and shuts down the Model 101. However, unbeknownst to the T-1000, the T-800 brings itself back online using an alternate power source. The T-1000 was about to kill John and Sarah, but the T-800 shows up and blasts it into a crucible of molten steel with a grenade launcher, dissolving and destroying it. John tosses the arm and the CPU of the original Terminator into the vat as well. As Sarah expresses relief that the ordeal is over, the Terminator explains, "No, there is one more chip. It must be destroyed also." It asks Sarah to assist him in lowering him into a vat of molten steel, since I cannot self-terminate. You must lower me into the steel. Although John begs and eventually orders the Terminator to reconsider, it makes the decision to defy him, bids them farewell, and hugs a tearful John before it is lowered into the vat, giving a final thumbs up as it disappears within. In a pretty honestly heartbreaking scene. John and Sarah drive down a highway, with the latter having a renewed hope for the future based on the Terminator's actions, thus ending the film on a relatively happy note.
Well, it's certainly resolved, and people will often say that, well, especially with the even longer special edition, that it has a definitive ending. But I digress.
What ending is that?
Oh, you've never seen it? Okay, so in addition to the scenes might be on your copy, but I have it's a special edition DVD from 2000. And again, like I said, you're able to enter a code, or you could if your remote had numbers. Unfortunately, my Blu-ray player doesn't. My DVD player used to. Anyway, you put in a code, which is actually the date for Judgment Day, and there's an even longer special edition, which adds a scene where the T-1000 is still lingering at John's foster home, his foster parents' home, and he's investigating the room, and he basically runs his hands all over.
That I know about, but what's the ending? What's the even ending? Longer ending?
Okay, so after Uncle Bob, sacrifices himself, they do the fade in. What they do, instead of showing a highway, they jump forward to the year 2029, and there's like this matte painting or something.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. It's the one where like Linda Hamilton's older and John's all grown up and he has a child of his own.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay, I have heard of that one. Okay.
Yeah. So there is an edition of this movie which puts that ending on there, which was an ending that Cameron proposed, and makes me wonder if that's how he wanted to wrap it all up.
That's like franchise killer right there.
Yeah, and see, history would have been different if he had tacked on that ending, but he realized that, even if he probably wasn't going to make an additional film, that somebody else probably would. So, it is what it is. So yeah, this plot.
Fantastic.
Very, very good. Very, very good, as I will get into with one of my pros. It has a lot of the same ingredients as the first movie, but it adds to it, adds some more spices and new flavors, so to speak.
And everything nice.
Yeah, for instance, there's two first meeting moments. That's because we have two, technically we have one target and two protectors, and then a new Terminator, but technically Sarah could be considered a target as well.
Yeah.
So basically, there's a build on to the formula from the first movie. We hit some of the same beats. There's some callback moments, but it's different because it's like a new character or something like that. But there are similar moments, like the finale in the steel mill is kind of similar to the finale in the factory. There's like little moments like where Sarah glances at the oncoming Terminator that keeps on coming. Like in the first movie, she sees the endoskeleton come out of the fire. In this movie, as John and Uncle Bob are helping her get away from the truck, she sees the T-1000 reconfigure itself. There's just a lot of similar beats, and it also helps that Cameron directed both movies, so he knows what he's doing.
Yeah,
he knows that. Yeah, he knows what he's referencing and whatnot.
Here's a question. How many times throughout cinema history has a director come back to direct his own movie sequel?
Well, the first one that comes right off the top of my head is Jurassic Park with The Lost World.
Okay, there's that. All right.
There's some other examples. I just can't think of them right away. But
why do some people hate Jurassic Park too?
That's a question for the ages. We'll pose that to the ether.
Not Gal Gadot, totally. Patty Jenkins directed Wonder Woman 84.
That's right. That's a more recent example, and she's probably going to direct the third one too. George Lucas directed all the prequels for Star Wars, and he also did the original movie.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, there's some other examples, but the first one that I would think of is Jurassic Park, definitely. Even though, unfortunately, The Lost World doesn't have the same reception as T2, but,
for some fucking reason.
I also like how, and I could get into this with the T-1000, but I'll go ahead and mention it here. I also like how, at least with the first three movies, there's kind of an evolution in terms of how the Terminators try and find their targets. With the first T-800, he looks in the phone book. The T-1000 has an advantage in the fact that he's pretending to be a policeman, so he has access to the police database. And then the TX is even furthermore because she actually has an online database already, to access whenever she arrives. That's kind of like her defining thing is all of her onboard capabilities. So
Maybe I
there's a nice
should
progression
have you as my guest for T3.
Oh, you want me to? I kind of want to now, but I don't want to take that away from Jackie Boy.
Well, maybe I could try to figure out to have 2 guests, but that's neither here nor there. Continue with T2.
Yeah, so that's just a little neat thing that I noticed here, aside from the similarities to the first movie. And there was another thing I thought of when you were reading it. But no, this just adds on to the first movie in all the right ways. It establishes a formula, which some people, I guess, could hold against it if they're so inclined. But yeah, it just works. It's a good plot. It's a good story. Yeah, we're gonna get into it because I have 10 pros as well.
All right. So my opinion on this movie's story, it is the ultimate greatest example of a sequel, in my opinion. It takes familiar elements from its predecessor, doesn't necessarily copy them, but it feels like they're copied, like they're present in this, but they're given a lot more meat on the bones. I almost said fat, but that's not really the case. They're given a lot more meat on their bones. The heightened budget definitely does help. The vastly heightened budget. There's more time to flush out the story. There's more time to flush out the characters. I'm distracted. Hang on one sec. One sec, guys. There's more time to flesh out the story, more time to flesh out the characters. The heightened budget gives things a much more epic and bombastic feel. There's just a lot more room to breathe and a lot more room to explore, and James Cameron makes excellent use of all that room. And it just builds on top of that formula that the first one had, but also it takes that formula and turns it on his head. What you previously thought was the bad guy, and it's not really known at the very beginning of the movie, is Arnold the good guy or the bad guy. It kind of comes as a bit of a surprise when Arnold is revealed to be the good guy. And then it still turns that formula on its head. Fuck. Okay, there he goes. Trev.
Yeah, I'm back. Just give me a minute.
And yet, it still turns that formula on its head because the weaker adversary that you initially think is the case turns out to also be a cyborg and also is stronger than what you thought the strongest character was, being Arnold's character. There's so many twists and turns that James Cameron throws in this movie that you don't realize and just makes this movie even better. So yeah, there's lots of things about this that, in my opinion, make this the greatest sequel ever made, bar none. Not counting any. Well, I mean, Godzilla King of the Monsters is a pretty fantastic sequel too.
I would tend to agree. Do I sound okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. On the note of what you were saying, actually, whenever the trailer or trailers for this movie were dropping, there wasn't any internet back then, so there was this belief before people actually saw the movie that there were two evil Terminators.
Ooh, that would have been cool.
And of course, like you were saying, whenever the audiences would actually see the movie, they would realize, oh, one of these is a good guy, and one of them is a bad guy. Or it was either that, or they expected the one in the cop uniform to be the good guy. I think that it was either one of those two things. But yeah, what a world to live in, pre-internet.
Yeah, it's almost unfathomable.
Yeah, nowadays especially.
And then it's a nice surprise. Well, I'll save that for a minute. Anything else to add?
No, let's get into our pros, because I'm sure we'll elaborate through them.
I think we're going to talk about our pros together. So I have 12 pros.
I have 10.
I could actually even make it 13.
Well, look at you. I know that I wanted to definitely be an even number, so I always want to at least make 10.
I'll stick with 12.
Yeah. I mean, you can do what you want. I mean,
so pro number one.
Pro number one for me is Uncle Bob, or the Terminator, the T-800.
The T-800 is my pro number one as well. He's great.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and let people know that I from the first one on, the first Terminator is just the Terminator to me. But every Terminator after that, I try to give a nickname. Genesis and Dark Fate did it for me, with Pops and Carl. So I call the Terminator in this movie Uncle Bob, and I call the Terminator in the next movie Macho Man. So yeah, Arnold, it stands to reason. I mean, the Terminator is one of his most iconic roles, whether he's a villain or a hero. Again, he's on both lists for both the top 100 movie villains and movie heroes. This, like I was saying yesterday, kind of like how the first Terminator kind of gave him a new phase in his career. This movie took it to the next level, because the 90s has its own flavor compared to the 80s stuff, even though it's all Schwarzenegger. And then similarly, T3 was also, like I was saying, another phase of his life. But yeah, he's great. He goes through an arc in this movie. It doesn't have any questionable issues, like I guess some people might say with Carl and Dark Fate. Everything's just laid out very well with Uncle Bob. They explain why he changes by the end of the movie. The whole chip reprogramming scene, which is really great. It's also a great moment for Sarah, but more on that in a second. Yeah, he's on fire in this movie. He embodies the action hero. I mean, like he was doing that already with stuff like Commando and Predator, and or even stuff like Running Man and Total Recall. I mean, he had that leading man quality, but this is just where I feel it was cemented. Like, yeah, Arnold's not going anywhere. He's gonna be a legend for probably for all time. And that's probably the highest praise I could give for how he performs in this movie.
I need to get closer to your mic.
Could you hear the last thing that I said?
Yeah, but it's like really, really muffled.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Is this better?
Yes, that's way better.
Okay. So what was the last thing you heard?
Oh, well, I heard what you said, but just continue.
Okay, yeah. But no, why don't you give your piece on it, Nick? Because
all right. So pro number one for me is the T-800 Uncle Bob. He is fucking fantastic. I don't really know. I kind of go back and forth on what I think is Arnold's best performance. It's between True Lies, Terminator 2, Total Recall, and probably the original Terminator as well.
Mm-hmm. It shows some range.
Huh?
It shows some range, those movies that you mentioned. It shows he does different things in each of them.
Mm-hmm. I thought his performance in Collateral Damage was also pretty solid too. Even though that's not one of his best movies, that his character there is is fairly different from what the norm that he was usually doing. But anyway, so his performance in this movie is utterly fantastic. He does so much with this role. At first, he's just like the carryover from the first movie, just a brutal, mindless, badass killing machine. Then he turns from that to being the loyal, badass, no nonsense guardian, to the curious and quick learning and insightful student, back to being the badass protector. And then at that same time, too, he also is a father figure. There's so much that he does in this movie. It's not even funny. And it's amazing that this machine is able to be so many things at the same time, whereas he's just programmed to be either a killing machine or a guardian, and that's it. But he does so much. Everything that Arnold does with the Uncle Bob feels totally natural. It doesn't feel at all like he's trying to copy what he was doing in the first movie, which even when he's not reprogrammed to learn, and when you're under the impression that he's not the good guy, it doesn't feel like he's copying what he did in the first movie. It feels new. Despite the fact this looks exactly the same as the previous model, this feels like a different entity. It's kind of hard to describe, but what Arnold does with the Terminator, technically, yes, he's another T-800, but it still feels different, which is another aspect as to why I think this is one of the greatest sequels of all time. You cannot say this movie has sequelitis.
You could actually say that it's kind of poetic in the fact that a T-800 killed Kyle, which was John's actual father. And then this movie kind of has a repentance or a comeuppance of sorts, where a new Terminator fills that slot of being his father figure. So it's kind of making up for a past sin, I guess you could say.
Yeah. It also helps, of course, that when it comes to being a badass, Arnold definitely does not disappoint.
Nope.
Some may say that it's slightly disappointing that the Terminator doesn't really kill anybody in this movie, which even Arnold was like that too. He just said, "I'm the Terminator," when James said, "You're not really going to be killing anybody in this movie." Granted, yes, for me, I kind of do miss the badass Terminator going around blowing people to smithereens, but in the context of this movie, it also does work. But just because he's not allowed to kill, at least there's no rule about him just fucking people up. Every chance he gets, he's shooting out some people's knees, and it's very cathartic to watch. And the first time he does it, his line delivery is just so badass because you know exactly what he means by that. He'll live. When he shoots out that guard's legs when they're going to save Sarah. His mannerisms are totally believable. Whenever he's asking questions, when he's learning, it actually does come across as he's a curious machine asking questions about humanity. It also helps that his chemistry with the rest of the cast is pitch perfect. But I'm not going to get into the rest of the characters just yet. I will as I go along. But yeah, Arnold's badass. He's at the top of his game. This is debatably the greatest performance of his entire career. And I don't know if he earned any Oscars or if he was nominated for any Oscars for this film. But if he wasn't, that's a crime, damn shame.
Maybe not any Oscars, but some kind of like People's Choice Awards or something like that. We have to remember those too, because those usually are less snobby. So pro number 2?
Oh, it was nominated for. Hang on.
Sorry.
It was nominated for a Saturn Award for Best Actor. It didn't win it, but he was still nominated.
Yeah, makes sense.
It did win a 1992 MTV Movie Award for Best Male Performance for Arnold. So, okay, I'll call that a win.
Yep. Oh yeah, I'm looking at them too. They even if well, it seems like it won a lot of the things it was nominated for.
Well, yeah, it did. It still cleaned up in terms of awards, but I just think it's a
Yeah.
little bit of a shame that he at least didn't get a nomination for Oscars for best performance for Arnold.
Yeah, because I mean, Sigourney Weaver had that for Aliens, and this movie very much channels that spirit. So,
moving on, pro number 2.
yes, pro number 2 is Sarah Connor. Now, it's
She
funny.
is pro number 4, but we'll talk about her together.
Yeah, so it's funny. I used to be. This is one of the things that I held against the movie whenever I had my funk towards it. I still say that I would probably prefer Ripley to lead me into battle.
Me too, because
Sarah's a bit of a loose cannon. She's a good fighter, but
she's
you
a
don't know if
bitch.
she's just going to, drive the car off the road, so to speak.
She's a good fighter, but she's kind of a dick.
Yeah, so I mean, okay.
No. She's mean spirited. That's what she is. She's just some of it's understandable because she's very angry.
Yeah, she's also very traumatized. PTSD to the max.
Yes, which again is understandable, but sometimes how people handle trauma can't be helped, but there are ways to deal with trauma. And Sarah isn't, in my opinion, doing the best job.
No, and I would tend to agree. But she still has some very poignant moments in this movie. She's very sympathetic in spite of her loose cannon vibe, because she's kind of basically being not only demeaned or mocked in the mental hospital, she's also being abused to an extent.
You know what all these hospital scenes reminded me of? Rob Zombie's version of Dr. Loomis in Halloween.
Well, you know what? I wouldn't put it past Rob Zombie to have probably been inspired by T2 or.
Well, he was more so inspired by all the mental hospitals that Geraldo exposed in early in his career for Halloween. Yeah. But how Dr. Silberman treats, which by the way, I really like that this actor returned in all three in both sequels to play his character. Not really going to talk about him, but I just want to say Dr. Silberman really reminded me of Malcolm McDowell's version of Sam Loomis. Not quite as unlikable or exaggerated, especially in Halloween 2. But Silberman definitely did give me some Malcolm McDowell's Loomis vibes in this movie.
I think his problem more so is that he is just willfully ignorant.
Yeah.
He's like the embodiment of the disbeliever, or not the disbeliever, the cynic in these movies. Like, oh, there's no monster. You're full of it. Stuff like that trope.
It's kind of fun to watch his bubble get burst when he watches the T-1000 morph its way through that gate.
He's and I keep on mentioning T3, but there's a great follow-up moment to that where you can tell that moment has stayed with him for years, and just his little moment in T3 is even funnier when you think about back to him realizing, oh shit, there actually is shit like this going on. It's funny. It's a great callback. But
back to Sarah.
Yeah,
so I make it sound like I don't like Sarah in this movie. I do. This most recent viewing, however, it just gave me really mixed feelings because on one hand, I feel bad for her because she went through some shit, but it kind of seems like she's still the one that's being punished. She's lost her child. She's lost her freedom. And in some ways, she's low-key losing her mind. And she also lost the love of her life. But on the other, it's sympathetic and understandable why she's kind of nutty for a good chunk of this movie, because she is angry and she is bitter and she just seems really frustrated this whole movie. Like, she is stuck in a shitty situation and she's stuck in a way of solving that shitty situation. And it's ironic that it takes the enemy of her enemy to be her friend in order to get her out, being Uncle Bob.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, a carryover. Well, not necessarily a carryover, but we mentioned this in our Aliens review. Though here it's brought much more to the forefront. It's kind of strange that Sarah is forced to trust and put faith into literally the machine that killed the love of her life in protecting both her but also her son. That, of course, being Uncle Bob. And then by the end of the movie, she learns to trust him, and she does seem to be a bit saddened when he decides to sacrifice himself. So Sarah's arc in this movie is good. You just kind of have to put up with her more unlikable aspects. I say that lightly because she's not exactly unlikable, but the closest that she does get to being unlikable is when she's about to gun down Miles Dyson.
Yeah, and I will say that's also a very poignant moment. That's a great acting job from Linda. And
yes,
her nightmare dream moments are also very good. Yeah, I feel the same way you do to an extent, but I guess just on this recent viewing, I was inclined to think of the more positive and I guess some people would say iconic things. With Sarah in this movie, it kind of established what people thought was a trend with Cameron. He only did it twice though. He created the female action hero. With Ripley.
There's elements of that in True Lies, with Jamie Lee Curtis coming out of her shell and being a badass.
Yeah. So actually, I shouldn't say that he created it, but he redefined it in a way that's very memorable. I mean, a lot of people always... Go ahead.
Neytiri is definitely a badass.
Yes, I would agree. So yeah, I mean that did seem to be a trait of Cameron's work, and you can definitely say that he redefined that kind of character. But yeah, I mean she does a good job. She's again, like I said, I would prefer Ripley to lead the charge into battle, and Sarah would be the one that I'd be watching to make sure she was okay. But I think in a way she's also like this because since they introduced John, John has to have a reason to kind of stand up and take charge, and he kind of has to do that with Sarah being the loose cannon that she is. I mean, that's the whole moment with Miles is that basically John. Well, and also
John has to bring her back down to earth.
Yeah, back down. It's supposed to demonstrate why he's going to be the guy who's going to bring humanity back from the brink. There's also the moment where she tries to smash the chip, and that really probably would have fucked them over because I'm sure the T-1000 would have definitely killed them had Uncle Bob been taken out of the picture. But yeah, those are just some great moments between her and Eddie Furlong as John. So yeah, Sarah is undoubtedly next to Uncle Bob himself one of the most iconic things about the movie.
Yeah, and thankfully, after John brings her down to earth after the Miles incident, for the rest of the movie, she does redeem herself, and she is a lot more helpful, is a lot more reasonable, and is a lot more likable. Though, kind of like her angry attitude is just slightly off-putting during that conversation with Miles when he realizes, oh shit, I'm bringing about the end of the world. Like, fucking men like you build the hydrogen bomb. Men like you, all you know how to do is create death and destruction. I'm just like, okay, we get it. Shut up.
It's like John said, we need to be more constructive here. So really, he actually he actually brings her back down to earth 3 times in the movie. The chip moment, keeping her from killing Miles, and then immediately after that,
shutting down her feminism talk.
Yeah.
Oh God.
So
such foreshadowing for a darker fate.
Well, and it's funny in that movie, she's a lot more. It's another phase for Linda as the character, but we have a whole review about that. So, moving on.
Yep, go right ahead.
Pro number 3 is the T-1000, Mr.
Yes!
Robert Patrick.
Hell fucking yes.
A very different flavor of villain
compared to the boy.
The first two, he's still very on par, or maybe just a little bit more iconic in some ways. I think it's kind of a toss up between the original Terminator and the T-1000. But yeah, I mean, just I don't know what else to say other than the fact that this dude is iconic. It's such a great idea to put your villain in a position of, or a societal position of authority or law enforcement, because that gives him such an advantage in his mission. Like I was saying earlier when we were talking about the plot, he has an advantage that the original Terminator didn't have. He just had to look through the phone book. The T-1000 has access to the police database, and in addition to that, he has, again, he's a prototype, but he is an advancement from just a cybernetic organism. I mean, he doesn't have to worry about like a mainframe, or not a mainframe, like a skeleton to worry about getting destroyed, or flesh to fall off. He's basically just a metal glob that's mimicking the appearance of a human, but he doesn't have that organic weakness. He's very amorphous. He's very adaptable to a certain point. He has his limits. You have to give your monster a weakness. Otherwise, your characters can't defeat him in the end.
Even in this case, I wouldn't really even say that it's a weakness. It's just a limitation of the technology. And I wouldn't really even say that's a weakness, because sometimes that can be turned into a positive. But yes, you are right. You have to give not just your villains, but your characters in general, you have to give them limitations. Otherwise, they just become either just too overpowered, or in Rey Skywalker's case, a Mary Sue.
Yeah. But no, well, here, give your piece, and I'll just work off your input.
The T-1000 is, in my opinion, one of the greatest movie villains of all time, because there's so much that goes into it that makes him seem so, I almost said unappealing. That's not it. So unassuming, that's the word. So unassuming, yet so terrifying at the same time. He looks physically much weaker than the big giant rock that is Arnold. And you just like, how the hell is this guy going to take on Arnold? But then when you discover the technology within him, you're just like, damn, this dude is low-key unstoppable. It's like the phrase, appearances can be deceiving. It also, he looks like a police officer, so that makes him look even more unassuming, and that kind of gives you the incentive to believe that he's the good guy when in fact he's the bad guy. It's like the phrase sheep in wolf's clothing.
Well, and also
a wolf in sheep's clothing, excuse me.
Yeah, and also to note the physical differences from Cameron's own mouth. He said that the T-800 is like a tank, and then the T-1000 is like a Porsche. So, different capabilities, but still effective for, whatever you're going to be. In this case, killing machines. I mean, he's still not to be fucked with.
Nope, not at all. It's just in a different way. I more like to compare it against the T-800, which is a giant spiked mace, versus the T-1000, which is a sleek curved dagger. They both have the same effect, just one is cleaner than the other.
a blunt instrument versus a sleek one.
Yep. The T-1000 is just absolutely fantastic. He's not my favorite Skynet
model
machine. I actually considered doing a video at one point ranking every single version of the Terminator all throughout the entire Terminator franchise, which does still sound like a good idea, but the T-1000 is not one of my favorites. But in the context of the Terminator franchise, the T-1000 is an absolutely iconic villain and should be considered one of the top 10 greatest movie villains of all time.
It is by far. Oh well, he's on the list for sure. This is also by far Robert Patrick's most iconic role. Unlike Arnold, Robert never really became like an action star or anything. He did, of course. You see him; he's become more of like a character actor, where you see him in a movie, it's like, oh, it's Robert Patrick. But you're probably most likely, whenever you're going to see him, you're probably, if you don't know his name, you're probably going to say the T-1000, or as the normies might say, the liquid metal guy from T2. So yeah, undeniably iconic. He's also a big reason why this movie drew so much attention in terms of how he was executed. But more on that when I get to the effects.
Yes, of course.
So yeah, T-1000. Undoubtedly, he's as the Xenomorph Queen was the great new addition to the Alien movies. The T-1000 is for the Terminator movies.
Yes.
All right. Pro number
4. John Connor.
I don't know if he. Oh no, I was going to say Miles.
Oh well, the only 4 characters I talk about in my pros is Uncle Bob, T-1000, Sarah, and John.
Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and say my brief piece about Miles. Not a whole lot to say here, but I do think Miles is a good part of the ensemble. I mean, the main 4 are obviously the 2 Terminators, and then Sarah and John, the Connors. But Miles is another great addition to the Terminator mythology. I mean, he is the source, I guess you would say, of where everything comes from. I mean, technically, the original Terminator's chip is where it all comes from. But that chip being put into Miles' hands, albeit not in a direct fashion, or actually it is kind of a direct fashion, he just expands on it from there. It's just that expansion of the Judgment Day mythology. We're seeing how the
By the way, the burp fuel is vanilla Coke.
Oh, dang, that makes me want to have one. But no, Miles is definitely one of the pieces that's coming into focus in terms of how the subtitle of this movie, Judgment Day, is gonna come into play. And Joe Morton, this is undoubtedly probably his most memorable role.
Aside from Cyborg's dad.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was just about to say. Really, that's just kind of a big reference to Terminator 2 in the fact that it's basically another scientist making a cyborg or being involved in cybernetics. And I think Zack Snyder knew what he was doing when he did that. But no, kind of like with Robert Patrick as the T-1000, definitely Robert and Joe can be very thankful to James Cameron for making them iconic or giving them a memorable role. If anything else failed in terms of their careers, people would remember Robert as the T-1000, and most people, whenever they see Joe Morton, they think, "Oh, it's Miles Bennett Dyson." So yeah, not responsible as Miles Bennett Dyson. I just not a whole lot to say. I mean, because again, he's not one of the main 4, but he is part of the ensemble. He has some nice little moments in the special edition where, he's really just playing the same character again as Cyborg's dad, is a father who's neglecting his family. But thankfully, he comes back from the brink before it's too late, unlike in the case of Silas Stone. So yeah,
I didn't really get the sense that. I didn't really get the sense that Miles is neglecting, per se, his family. He's just very
distracted.
Huh?
He's just very distracted. You can tell that he has trouble dividing his time. But no, I mean, at least for me, at least on this viewing, he just stood out. And again, like I was saying, comparing him with the the T-1000 part. This is undoubtedly probably his most memorable role. So yeah, he ended up being my pro number 4. You're a pro number 4.
John.
Well, he factors into my cons a little bit. Or I don't have cons, I have nitpicks.
Same for me too. We'll save that for last. There's one thing about him that, well, two things actually, but they're just kind of nitpicks. But Eddie Furlong as John Connor, he's great. This
is probably hands down his best role.
Yeah, because what the fuck else was he in after this? Well, no, he was in Pet Sematary 2.
Brain Scan.
The remake of Night of the Demons.
Oh yeah, that was long after too. Before that, he was in the awful Fourth Crow movie.
Oh yeah. Oof. So
yeah, it kind of went downhill from this. So John. Before I get into my nitpicks, which we'll save to the end, I'll just say that he's equal parts good and bad. That's what I'll say. That's why he didn't end up on my pros.
I wouldn't say he's equal good and bad. One thing that bugs me about him was something that he couldn't help. And the other is just the writing. That kind of gives it away, but just bear with me. But I do like John Connor. At first, he comes off as being kind of a snot-nosed brat. And also our introduction to him is him literally doing ATM fraud.
Easy money, baby.
But he kind of wins us over, mostly with his chemistry with Arnold, but also in how he shows compassion for immediately wanting to go out and save his mom when he realizes my mom's gonna die. We need to go save her. That definitely won me over as a kid, partially because some have accused me of being kind of a mama's boy. Oh well.
There ain't nothing wrong with that.
But no, I put myself in his shoes. If I found out that my mom was going to be hunted down by a liquid nanoborg, I'd be like, save mama. So
do it, plan.
And like I said, his chemistry with Arnold is very, very believable. Their relationship is almost the highlight of the movie, aside from all the mass spectacle around them. And watching him interact with pretty much everybody in the entire movie, except Miles, like him interacting with his mom is fun to watch. Him interacting with Arnold is fun to watch. And also him placing little seeds that showcase that, I can turn into something great. One, with how he teaches Arnold. Two, with how he brings his mom back down to earth. And also his tech skills. Like I stated in my Dark Fate review, that's one thing that they could expand upon in the future, is that they showcase that he's a tech geek. And he knows how to hack into computers, which is something that will probably be very helpful when dealing with an AI. What, Trev?
Oh, well, just on the note you were about to say, they did that a little bit in Salvation. There was somebody on the internet who even joked that the scene where Christian Bale's John Connor is breaking into Skynet, he should have had like a moment wherever he said easy money, calling back to T2. But no, on the note of here's what I'll say, and probably why this movie is so as wide appealing as it is. You have the action star that is Arnold Schwarzenegger. You have Linda Hamilton as Sarah, which is probably who your mom and your girlfriend and any of your female people in your life are probably following her because she's that character that they want to identify with. And then we have John, who is kind of the youth element in a way that the first. Go ahead.
Real quick, I want to say, we're back to Linda Hamilton real quick. One thing that always made me kind of compare my mom to Linda Hamilton in this movie, they both have serious mom voices, like
yeah.
drop the shit. On the floor, hold it open, face the wall. They have like the mom voice, like the angry mom voice.
Yeah, you know you're in trouble and you better watch out.
Yes. Which I love about Linda Hamilton in this movie. Like when she brings out the mom voice, you best listen.
Oh yeah, definitely. But no, really, I think the code to why this movie became such a phenomenon is, again, Arnold. You have Linda as a feminist icon, for better or worse, and then you have the youth element. You have the youth element embodied with John. You didn't have that with the first movie. John, as this young preteen going into his teenage years, he kind of has he brings in that audience element. And to his credit, I will say, in addition to like bringing down his mom from her rampaging and also teaching Uncle Bob, he also has another great people skills moment where he knows to get Danny Dyson out of the room so that he's not traumatized. He knows to take him out of there and let him not see something that will potentially scar him. So that's also a nice little detail that's planted in there, and I appreciate it on this last. Oh, actually, I've always appreciated it, but it's a nice little. You can tell John Connor is going to be something great. Mm-hmm. So yeah, continue.
That's all I have to say about John. He is a likable kid. He also feels like a very real kid, and also he was allowed to swear, which is something I always envied as a kid. Like, why can't this kid swear?
Yeah, it's too bad that Newt didn't do that in Aliens, because that would have been funny. Because Cameron would have been the guy to make child actors swear. I mean, not that they don't in other things, but it would have been funny. Anyway, you were saying.
No, that's all I have to say. Eddie Furlong does a great job. He's also very sympathetic in a way too, because yes, he is a strong kid, but he's still a kid.
Yep.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, to say the least. It's a nitpick. I'm just going to spoil it. I don't really have any cons with the movie. It's funny, at a certain time I probably would have had some, but now they're just nitpicks. Okay, so moving on. My pro number 5 is going to be the story. We actually kind of got into this, in review of the plot, but again, it just adds on to the mythos. I mean, it's the same formula, but it has just the extra ingredients to make it that much sweeter, so to speak.
The sugars and spice and everything nice.
Yeah, it feels like a natural progression of that world, so to speak. It begs an interesting question. We might save that for later. I was just going to say, should Judgment Day be inevitable, or should it be fixed or prevented? That's a question.
We'll save that for T3.
Okay. But no, yeah, this is it just works. I mean, that's the best thing you can say about this story, is it's firing on all cylinders. It's that same formula, but again, you just managed to do just enough different with it where it's special on its own.
Yep.
So yeah.
So yes, I agree with this too. The pro number 5 is also the story for me. Because I just now realized the story in the first movie wasn't technically concluded. Skynet was still out in the future, and this was only the first attempt to stop John Connor from being created. Who's to say that Skynet wouldn't try again? And obviously with this movie, it does try again. And it's also an evolution that the Resistance caught on to Skynet's tricks, so they decided to do something similar of their own. So, and also, this does bring the story to a full close. Seemingly, for those people that just want to acknowledge T1 and T2 as part of the timeline, this movie does bring it to a close and bring it and wrap everything up in a nice bow. Yeah, it's fantastic. I already pretty much talked about the story when I was for my initial thoughts, it's fantastic. It's a great expansion. Feels like a natural continuation, and it feels right at home in this Terminator mythos. No thanks to the fact that James Cameron, like Trev said, did return to direct the sequel. If he had not, this movie would not have worked nearly as well.
No, or its impact would have been different at the very least. I mean, that's evident with pretty much any of the other movies. Even if both me and Nick are champions for the rest of the franchise, you still feel the absence of Cameron after this, unfortunately. But you either let it bother you severely or not. So
I choose not to.
Yeah, same with me. I choose not to let it bother me.
Pro number 6.
So
for
pro
me,
number 6 is going to be the action.
Okay, we can get into that. I was going to say, taking a page out of Trev's book, The Emotional Impact.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Specifically,
go ahead.
This specifically has to do with John and Arnold's relationship.
Oh, yeah.
Something that got to me this most recent viewing was the death of Uncle Bob. Now, as a kid, I was always bummed, of course. I was like, oh, come on. Why does he have to go? I don't want him to go. I want him to stay. But on this most recent viewing, watching him die, or I say die, like, because, he's a character, and watching John have just his heart shattered into a million pieces. And then once Arnold gives his thumbs up, his vision shuts down, and then John just turns into a mess in Sarah's arms. It didn't bring tears to my eyes, but it was pretty gut-wrenching to watch. But it was in a good way. It's not like at the opening of Alien 3 where it just feels like a sledgehammer to the gut. Watching Newt and Hicks be just tossed aside.
No, the Terminator equivalent of that obviously happened in Dark Fate, but yeah.
Yeah, and it makes the first 5 minutes of that movie even worse now that this is fresh in my head. Go through all this shit in this movie, and then the first 5 minutes of Dark Fate renders it all moot. You're just like, wow, guys.
Well, you could also argue that pretty much any of the sequels kind of render the last act of this movie moot, but that's a discussion in itself.
So that's really all I have to say. I just wanted to say that the ending when Uncle Bob sacrifices himself, it's appropriately gut-wrenching. It is sad. It is a little hard to watch, especially watching a boy pretty much have to watch his father commit suicide. And then watch him just fall to pieces after that. It is pretty hard for me to watch, especially now that I'm about to become a dad. I wouldn't like seeing my little boy be upset. Yeah, it's appropriately heart-wrenching.
It changes your perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
On that note, again, like I said, it's kind of poetic that the Terminator is kind of, in a way, symbolically kind of making up for what another one of his kind did in the original movie, and he becomes the father figure that Kyle didn't get to be. And also, this death is kind of similar. It's slower and a lot more. I mean, both deaths are emotional, but Kyle's is pretty instant. I mean, he's knocked out and he's dead. Well, the explosion also contributed to that. But you could also say that Sarah, that hug that she gives John, has like another meaning in the fact that she knows what he's going through, and that she had the witness. Well, in her case, the love of her life, die, and then in his case, he had the witness his father figure die.
Yeah. And I also last thing to say about Sarah, I do like that she does embrace him and finally is allowed to just be a mom at that point. And I also like on her face, you can kind of tell that she also is affected by his sacrifice as well, because you get the sense that he was kind of growing on her a little bit. And when she shakes his hand and acknowledges him as not just a machine, but as like another individual or something along those lines, she does appear to be a bit pained by his sacrifice.
Yeah,
Which
I
is
agree.
nice.
I mean, suffice to say, there's layers going on here. There's lots of stuff that's communicated with not a whole lot. So it's very impressive seeing what you can read into it just by like little mannerisms and whatnot.
And I do believe at this point, Linda Hamilton was a mom, so she probably channeled that into her performance a little bit.
Oh yeah, for sure. Usually you can tell either that or somebody's just a damn good actor or actress. So
especially with her angry mom voice.
Oh man.
Alrighty, so you want to talk about the action? That's pro number.
For me, it's number 6. You probably 7. 7 or 8, probably.
7. Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, for me, the action in this. I mean, this is. The first movie already kind of planted the seeds, like I said, and both of them are some of the greatest action movies you're ever going to see. But then again, as we've been talking about, this movie takes it to the next level, and it's just
very much so.
it's super impressive. It's actually kind of I'll save that. I'll say a little bit about it. I was going to say it also factors into the suspense a little bit. The two things work in tandem very well. I think that basically the being introduced to the Terminators, the Connors being introduced to the Terminators for this movie, the mall scene and then the breaking out from the mental hospital scene, both have perfectly timed suspense and build up. You're waiting for the inevitable clash of everybody. Like in the mall scene, you're waiting for either Uncle Bob or the T-1000. You don't know who's going to find John first. And then with the mental hospital scene, Sarah's trying to get away or get out, so you're hoping that she does. But at the same time, you realize, oh, the T-1000's coming. Are John and Uncle Bob going to make it in time? And it's just a great crescendo of suspense, and then it blows up in these great moments of action. Mm-hmm. So actually, that's my pro number 6 and 7 is the action and suspense. And on that note, for the suspense, I do think there is still a minor carryover of the horror element from the first movie. It's not as strong as the first movie.
It has the echoes, to quote Cody Leach. It has the echoes of the horror element here.
Yeah, the T-1000 is the obvious instance of this. There were some other things, unfortunately, that have slipped my mind. But whenever I was watching it, I was thinking, oh, that's kind of disturbing. Or it's just dark in a horrific sense. So yeah, it's actually not quite as much of a departure from the first movie as some people would make it out to be, or even whenever I was down on this movie, what I would say is that it kind of just steered in a completely different direction.
That's or when the really T-1000 channels his inner Michael Myers and kills poor Max.
Oh yeah, definitely. Pretty much anything with the T-1000 is where the horror element comes in.
Probably,
he could be either one of the or any of the Terminators could be considered sci-fi slasher villains, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
So yeah, that's my pro number 6 and 7.
Well, my thoughts on the action is they're fucking spectacular. And yes, as Trev stated, the suspense is also very much on point here too. It's great build-up, and the action scenes are the fantastic payoff. To talk about the mall scene, that is when the mind game of you don't know which is which comes to its head. And it's a nice surprise when, at first, John busts through the door and you see Arnold walking towards him, pulls out his shotgun, walks towards him, and you think at first he's the bad guy. And then Robert Patrick comes around. Arnold aims his gun, and then he stops. And then Robert Patrick keeps walking, and then you just hear Arnold go, "Get down," fire a shot, and that's when you realize, oh, Arnold's the good guy.
Yep.
And then we have that brief knockdown drag out between Uncle Bob and the T-1000. And then it leads into, in my opinion, one of the top 10 greatest car chases of all time. John on a little dirt bike and the T-1000 and a big giant tow truck. And then you have Arnold coming along on his motorcycle, which, for the record, I love that spin reload that Arnold did with his shotgun, but didn't he nearly break his hand doing that?
I think so. He also, he's the one who came up with it on the set of the movie too, because I don't think I've ever seen that in any other movie that I can think of. So it's definitely unique.
Nope, I don't think anyone has. They probably, for like a because it's a lever action shotgun, for a Winchester rifle, they'll probably just like hold it by the lever action and just kind of flip it down and then flip it back up and catch it. I've seen that in Westerns a lot, but they never do the full-on spin reload. So, yeah, I think Arnold's the only one who's ever done that. And then going back to the action scenes, too, is the mental hospital. The suspense there, it's almost like a super condensed version of the cat and mouse game of the original Terminator. Though in this case, in Arnold's shoes, it's Robert Patrick. And the build-up and the reveal of also expanding upon the T-1000's abilities when he morphs his way through that prison gate, you're just like, oh, fuck. And then following that up with his ability to morph his arms into crowbars and blades, you're just like, damn, this dude's a badass. And that leads into another great car chase. The action scenes overall in this movie are extremely entertaining. Very well shot, very well edited, very hot-blooded, very bombastic, and extremely entertaining.
Really, it's just a lot of the similar set pieces from the first movie, but just with
a bigger budget.
With the extra added to it too. Like the early chase scenes are basically like like the mall scene is
the parking lot,
stuff like that, or like the nightclub in the first movie. It just feels like an expansion on those similar moments.
Yep.
So yeah, was the action and suspense two of your pros too?
Well, the suspense wasn't one of them, but the action, yes.
Okay, so I'm on my number 8. The music.
Yes!
Again,
Brad Fiedel returns and gives an Oscar-worthy contender. Fuck!
Yeah, it's the same theme as the first movie, but it has it's less synth, but it still has the same elements of tragedy and, creepy, kind of like Nick was saying yesterday. It's the same theme, but just done in a new way that makes it unique. And of course, there's additional musical bits. Talking about like the scene that Nick was describing just a few minutes ago. Whenever Uncle Bob basically commits suicide. I'll
say, my pro number 8 for me is the music as well.
The emotional way. I mean, the theme is already emotional. At least the Terminator theme has always been both badass and emotional to me. But he just restructures it or uses different instruments to make it that much more poignant and much more, again, even more emotional for that particular moment. But yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Not much to say. I will say, though, I prefer the music in the first movie to this because I think the synth makes it sound a lot more epic and, well, not really epic and badass, just for my tastes, it's more appealing. But the music
Oh
in
yeah,
this movie is just utterly outstanding. It's very well composed. It sounds very similar, but it also sounds different, but in a good way. Of course, we have the return of the Terminator theme, which is even more badass and more bombastic here. It's given that action movie feel and the big epic feel as well.
um, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
The rest of the music is very, very well done. It kind of feels like Brad Fidel was like Mickey Mousing this entire movie, where he was like watching the movie and he would compose the music to the beats of the movie as it would go along. Akira Ifukube did this for later Godzilla movies, which I think is probably the best way to compose music, because it's kind of hard to, at least in my mind, I imagine it's kind of hard to make a film soundtrack without having seen the movie itself. So you don't know what's going to work for this scene or what's going to work for that scene. That's why, in my opinion, if you're to compose a movie, you need to do the Mickey Mousing way of doing it, because I just feel like that's the best logical way to compose the best music. Yeah, Brad Fidel probably gives his best, well, one of his 3 best works being T1 and True Lies as well. Yeah, the music here is absolutely outstanding. Though I think, honestly, my favorite bit of music is during Uncle Bob's sacrifice.
Yeah, because it's a great.
You're far away again.
It's a great.
There you
is
go.
that better?
That's better.
Okay. Yeah, it's like I said, it's a great.
You're far away again.
Is that better?
That's better. Stay like that.
I think it might just be how low I'm talking or not. I'm actually going to go ahead and make this comparison. I don't know if anybody's ever made this before. I would say that what Brad does here is kind of similar to what John Williams does with Jaws 2. Is that there's a lot of the same flavor, and obviously the main theme is there, but it's just done in a way that it feels unique.
Well, it's like what Jackie Boy used to describe Jaws 1 and 2 in his Jaws 2 review. Jaws is very much like a horror thriller, as T1 is, whereas Jaws 2 is more like an action movie, which T2 definitely is. It's the same beat. Well, it's the same path. It's just slightly taken different beats here and there to make it feel different. And yeah, that's actually a very, very good comparison, if you ask me.
Yeah, and I actually just thought of it. So yeah.
Pro number 9.
Pro number 9 are the CG effects, and I'm noting them in particular because the practical, we can talk about them on their own level. But the CG effects, for one thing, they're groundbreaking in this movie, very iconic. This was a game changer. It's also another reason. This is also another reason why I think the movie drew so much attention, is the fact that there was something that nobody had ever seen before in here. Arguably, the beginnings of that started with the tendril, the water tendril in the abyss. But that just indicated to Cameron that it was time now for him to execute an idea that he actually had with the first movie. I mean, he not only had like the endoskeleton, more traditional cyborg kind of Terminator, which he went with because it was easier to do at the time of the first movie, but he also had the idea for the T-1000 in his head even back in the 80s. But enough time had passed to where obviously they were able to give it a go. And I think these are still some of the best early CG effects committed to film. The T-1000 kind of lends himself, even if somebody might have some nitpicks about the way his base form looks like, where he's basically just a silver Academy Award running around killing people. An Oscar, sorry, there we go. He's a silver Oscar running around killing people. I mean, it still looks good. I think it works for the concept of the character. Just lots of great little, like early regeneration effects, because there was some practical bits, like whenever the T-1000 was shot. But like whenever those holes filled in, they were obviously CGI and they looked really good. Anytime he like reformed, like his face or stuff like that, or even like working
the elongation of the limbs for the knives.
Yeah, or like working his way through the ceiling of the elevator. He's just
looking like a giant silver turd.
Yeah, it's just a very adaptable. It's just a cool effect. And again, like I said, I can see why this was so captivating and so groundbreaking at the time. There's probably also some CG effects used to kind of enhance stunts and whatnot, or maybe swap out faces. I think that was more of a case with Jurassic Park, where they started doing that more often. But yeah, these are some of the best early CG effects, and I mean, I think they still hold up today, in my opinion. There's also some great little tidbits whenever in the special edition, or really the version of the movie you should watch all the time.
Yes.
After he reforms himself, and he's basically glitching during the whole. Yeah, some great little effects moments where he like gets stuck on things, or his color changes, or there's like a streak running through his entire body. Just nice little, for lack of a better term, neat, cool effects, and I think they're pretty dang good.
My pro number 9, I actually whittled my list down to 10 pros. I was going to say the great production values, but that can just be wrapped into the effects and also the tone. But I pretty much think we already talked about that enough with the story. So I'll cut that out. So my pro number 9 is the fantastic array of special effects. We'll talk about the practicals first. The practicals are phenomenal. Thankfully, gone is the pretty noticeable Arnold dummy from the first movie. They have that here too, but it's much more well disguised and much more well edited.
It's also more of a lighting thing too. He was in pretty clear light in the first movie whenever we saw that dummy, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
Here it's kind of like the very kind of dim, kind of blue lighting of the Cyberdyne, building,
and also the sparks and the flash and bullets splaying all over the place kind of hides it too.
Go ahead.
The practical effects in this movie are utterly outstanding. The very first shot of the main Terminator, when after Sarah says the war against machines, I love that pan shot. Crunch a skull. Pan the camera up to show a full body T-800 endoskeleton just looking back and forth holding a giant plasma rifle. It's so badass. And then watching all these T-800s going around with laser rifles just blowing people to smithereens. In the opening Future War action scene is so goddamn good. Lots of animated lasers going around. You totally buy it as a future apocalyptic setting. The composite shots are really good. The miniatures look great. The composite, or I think I already said that. Yeah, the miniatures look great. The composite shots look good. The explosions are amazing. There's a little bit of wireworks there too, which those look really good. Don't see any. The animatronic endoskeletons walking around, you can tell that they are animatronic because they're literally moving around like robots. They're kind of slightly stiff. But since they are robots, that's kind of the point. So that doesn't bug me. And the rest of the practical effects throughout the movie, all the blood, what kind of little of it we do see, looks good. The makeup effects on Arnold's face when he's all fucked up at the end of the movie looks really good. They do a repeat of the non-moving endoskeleton eyepiece. There, though, it doesn't really bug me nearly as much, partially because they don't really focus on it very much. And I feel like they tried to blend it in with his face a lot better than in the first movie, because in the first movie, it kind of did just kind of stick out like a bulbous eyeball, whereas here it just looked a little bit more sunken into his head, so it looked more natural. And when his body is just all fucked up and there's pieces of flesh missing from his chest, the back of his head, one of his knees, his fucked up arm, Arnold is a mess by the end of this movie, and it looks fantastic.
I need a vacation.
I need a vacation. Oh, and that's another thing I forgot to mention about the T-800 too, is that he does slowly kind of turn into a smartass. Like the "I need a vacation" line and the "Trust me" line and the "Here, hold this."
I mean, look at his teacher. I mean, that kind of makes sense that if that's his main human contact, I mean, he's going to pick up some sass.
And of course, hasta la vista, baby. Love it. Anyway, so the rest of the effects are also very good too. The production value looks great. All the sets look good. They look like they're well thought out and well made. Well shot too. And then we're going to come to the CG effects for the T-1000. Yes, very revolutionary. Not exactly the first time we'd seen something like this, but this was the first time where I really feel like the very first step into making them look good was made. It goes to show, every time James Cameron makes a very special effects heavy movie, he kicks special effects in the ass forward a few years. That being said, I do think that the CG effects here aren't bad, but they are very prototypey and they are very experimental. Thankfully, it does pay off, and thankfully, it is used in a way to convey something that would look like the T-1000 pretty much just looks like a living blob of mercury, which is something that I like about future T-1000 models and future Terminator installments, specifically Terminator Genesis. I think that's when the T-1000 effects look their very best, as stated in our original Genesis review. Yeah, the CG effects here, they do look good, especially for their time. They do look slightly cartoony in a couple of shots. The biggest one for me is when it's the shot of his feet morphing into that metal chrome floor. It just looks slightly cartoony in how it just literally looks like liquid just morphing itself into the floor. But still very experimental, very prototypey. So you feel like you have to keep that in mind if you do criticize the CG effects in this movie. But thankfully, like I keep saying about James Cameron, I do get the sense he knew that they were very experimental, and that's why he only showed just enough of them to get the point across and nothing more. And still relied heavily on the fantastic practical effects, which do make up for the CGI's slight shortcomings.
Agreed.
Well, no, I'll talk about that in just a minute. And now, not to say that the effects are flawless, but we'll get to that when we get to our nitpicks.
Yeah, and I'll just, because Nick, you did a pretty good job talking about the practicals, but my pro number 10 was specifically the practical effects. And I second a lot of what Nick said, but in particular, that opening future scene shot with all the Fantasy 2 miniatures and whatnot, it's actually just a great compositing of a lot of different effects guys. You have the puppets by Stan Winston. I actually didn't know this until I watched the extras, but actually I found this out a good while ago, and I appreciate it. Although you don't notice it, there's actually is a stop motion endoskeleton in the background. But
really,
it's very, very it's very, very brief. It's a whole full shot. It's walking in the background. You're mainly focused on the Stan Winston puppets in the foreground because they're blowing shit up. So that's where your attention mainly is. But yeah, just the Fantasy 2 effects with the HKs. A great
Oh, I love the
costume.
HKs in this movie. They look so much better than the first movie. I never liked
Yeah,
the one single blaster on their cannons. I always preferred the
yeah,
two.
agreed. Um, and also, like you were saying with that one composite shot, well, there's actually more than one composite shot, but in that particular scene, the opening scene, just the great pan up from the resistant fighters. You see them in the foreground, then you pan up, and in the distance, you see all the HKs and everything coming forward. And it's just a great matching. It feels like they're actually there and actually experiencing all that.
Yep.
Great makeup effects on Arnold again as he slowly loses bits and pieces of himself. I like the great comparison in one of the fights, the final fight, really between the T-1000 and Uncle Bob. You have the new CGI effect. I'm not going to say there's a subtext here, but you could say it's just kind of giving the practical effects a run for their money. It's kind of a subtextual thing where the CGI T-1000 is beating the hell out of the practical T-800, and there's some great practical shots in that fight. Particularly, I think it's like a miniature or like a dummy whenever the T-1000 is slamming the
it's a dummy.
It's a great. Oh, ouch! That hurts. Well, you feel like it hurts because you're sympathetic for the character, but it's just very, very gritty and very visceral. The makeup's good. Although, like I said, you can still tell that there's some dummy shots of Arnold, particularly when he's getting shot at by the SWAT team. But again,
yep.
the lighting, and the quick cuts makes it better.
Mm-hmm.
There is one practical T-1000 shot that's not great, but I mean, it doesn't detract from the movie either. It's whenever he's hanging onto the car as they're escaping from the hospital, and they're just dragging him. It's like,
oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. But it is a dummy again, but I feel like you couldn't really have done it any other way but that. It's kind of like how in True Lies, as I pointed out to Meadow last night, when Arnold smacks the two Dobermans together, you can tell that they were dummies. But how the hell else are you going to smack two dogs together and get away with it other than them just being dummies? So I just think of it like that. I don't really let it bug me.
Yeah. Me either. It's just something that I noticed. If somebody was going to point it out, because unfortunately there are some people who do that, they would probably zero in on that. Excuse me. So yeah, just to wrap this up, and this is also my last pro. This is just a perfect example of various different effects being married together and working together to make a great whole.
Mm-hmm.
The CGI is used well. I mean, it was limited because it was
limited itself at the time.
Yeah, but it was still used to great effect, and then it was just a great step up for all the practical stuff. So yeah, it's a great marriage of all the techniques, and I kind of wish we would see that more often again. Maybe someday, but who knows?
I feel like there is still some of that in today's effects, like especially whenever like the return of practicals came, pretty much with the return of Jurassic Park and Star Wars. There was a lot more blending of practical and I'm going to have a little conversation with you later, Trev, but I think that between the years of 2007 or 8 and 2016, I kind of call the dark era of special effects. That's when all studios were just CG or nothing. But then when Jurassic Park and Star Wars came around, that kind of made studios realize, okay, practicals still can be used and used well with CGI. But
a slight exception. Sorry, excuse me. A slight exception for Universal because they did do a lot of CGI overlaying for the first Jurassic World movie. Thankfully, the practicals were a bit more noticeable in Fallen Kingdom. But yeah, I see your point. There has been a bit of a revolution.
But that's a subject for a different day.
Oh yeah.
My last pro is I just love the entire third act of this movie. Once they enter Cyberdyne, It's just one big action scene after another. You have the infiltration. You have Arnold taking his fucking minigun to the entire police force. You have the destruction of Cyberdyne, the big car chase in the highway between the SWAT van and the helicopter, the chase to the steel mill fight itself, and the destruction of the T-1000. That could be a movie in and of itself, and it's so entertaining. Not one scene drags, and everything feels essential to make one cohesive, entertaining, fluid, no pun intended, just masterpiece of cinema.
Yes, indeed.
And now for you?
Our nitpicks?
Oh, did you talk about your 10th Pro?
Yeah, it was the practical effects.
Okay, then yeah, let's talk about our nitpicks. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. The fact that John Connor is very obviously going through puberty in this movie.
Yeah, a lot of squeaking, a lot of voice breaking.
Yeah, you can hear a lot. It's every time he screams or he shouts, his voice cracks like crazy. It's kind of distracting, and it's also kind of funny because when I was going through puberty, I had a really, really bad voice cracking problem. I kind of slightly still have it to this day, but there would be moments where I'd be trying to talk and my voice would just, it would piss me off every single time. So, and there's actually one time when I did rewatch Terminator 2 when I was going through puberty, where I heard it in John's voice. I was like, oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Self-reflection.
Yep. But also, nitpick number 2, still regarding John, some of his dialogue is a little cringy.
Yeah, honestly, Nick, you kind of just took the words right out of my mouth. It's really just the fact that he's a kid. I mean, it brings a juvenile quality to things that, on one hand, makes this movie very accessible, but on the other, it kind of factors into the cringe elements. Again, it's one reason why John didn't really factor into my pros, is even though he has good stuff, some great acting moments, and some great character moments, overall, though, I think you might be inclined to focus more on the fact that he kind of is irritating. Not near as much as, like, say, Hobo John Connor in T3, but that's like a different phase for the character.
Yeah, that's different. Probably his cringiest line is after he tries to stop Sarah from destroying the chip. He goes, "Don't kill him. It, John, not him. It. Okay, it. But we need it. But he's my friend, all right?"
Yeah. Well, there's also another great moment, which is cringy but also kind of powerful, is whenever it's just him and Uncle Bob talking, and it's right before it's like Uncle Bob tries to keep him from, going to save Sarah, and like the two guys over at the car come and intervene. He's kind of cringy in that moment because it's just very he's such a kid, because he's he just says things, and it's like a kid just doesn't know. They don't have like that extra life experience to realize that some of the things you're taught don't necessarily equate to being like an absolute. And to put that in layman's terms, like the T-800, okay, he's a machine. He goes by program and everything. He's programmed. He's created to kill things. So he's not going to have that moral compass, that rule that you're not supposed to kill people. That's why he keeps on saying why. I mean, he just has no comprehension.
What do you mean why? Because you can't. Why?
Yeah, and it's like,
because you just can't. Okay, trust me on this. What a 10-year-old.
Yeah, it's like, why would he trust you? Because he's a machine. He's just going to do what you tell him to do. So again, that's the whole thing. He's just a kid. He's doesn't have that maturity in order to try and give depth to like the rules that he tries to impact on Uncle Bob.
He tries.
But but still, that's just a definite example of him being a kid. Or
Yeah.
like whenever he throws a fit, get this psycho off of me. He lets him go. Why the hell did you do that?
Because you
It's
told me
funny.
to.
It's funny, but I don't know. Again, it's very layered. It's either cringe or it's just that scene's also kind of dark because he just is like, oh, I have my own Terminator. He can just do whatever I tell him to, and then he doesn't realize the power of that concept, the fact that he has a killing machine under his thumb, and he was basically just going to kill those guys after he told him to, take care of them.
But that leads into another good acting bit is when he realizes, oh, hey, no, you can't kill.
Yeah.
Put the gun down now. Get out of here.
Really, yeah, exactly. In a way, it really just adds to John's growth in the fact that he kind of learns about life through having to master this machine. So it's funny we're talking about this in the nitpicks, but still, you see my point, right?
Yeah.
It kind of waxes and wanes in terms of when it. Again, that's why he didn't make my pros, because he has some good, but he also has some bad that I think I hold against the movie a little bit, or not against the movie. It's just something that bugs me.
Okay, so yeah, some of his dialogue is a little cringy. And the fact that he's clearly going through puberty, it both cracks me up, but it also kind of makes me cringe. But
yeah,
nitpick number 3, this really stuck out to me my most recent viewing. I already talked about Sarah being unlikable. That was another nitpick, is I kind of don't like how sometimes Sarah does come off as being a bit unlikable. But my last nitpick that I have, this movie's pretty tame when it comes to the gore.
Which is funny. Really, the only thing that makes it R-rated is all the language.
Well, you see a knife go through some dude's head.
Yeah.
But there's not very much blood. And you see a knife go through some dude's eyeball. But again, there's not much blood. I think the most blood that we do see is one of my favorite Sarah moments, because it's like a great comeuppance moment, is when Dougie gets his fucking nose whacked off of his face. The blood is just gushing out of a hole in his face, and it's a very violent, visceral beatdown. So that's a great moment for Sarah. But when Uncle Bob is cutting the skin off of his arm, there's like a little bit of blood on his arm, which you'd think there'd be more, which they showcase in Dark Fate, as I stated, when he gets his flesh torn off of his arm. It's just really sloppy and nasty. Here, it's very minimal, the amount of blood that's on Arnold's arm. And also when he's literally being scalped to get the chip out to reprogram it, there's just like a little bit of blood on his skull, and that's it. You think there'd be a lot more, and there's just a slight little trickle that goes down his forehead. So it's not a huge issue, but it does bring up something that Jackie Boy once told me about T2. This movie is very clean. Gone is the grittiness of the original Terminator.
Yeah.
For the most part. There's moments where this movie wants to be really violent and R-rated, which it is violent and R-rated, but the violence does feel a bit, I don't even want to say toned down, but it feels like it's a bit more restrained, which isn't necessarily disappointing because the visceral action scenes make up for that. But still, I do miss the grittiness from the first movie, which thankfully Dark Fate puts right back in.
Yeah, and then even Rise of the Machines has some shocking, violent moments. They're not particularly gritty, but they're still a little bit more bombastic than.
Like the impalement scene.
The impalement scene. Also, probably a little bit more risque, like with the bar and whatnot, and the TX, stuff like that. I mean, just a little bit here and there. It's actually kind of funny that people complain about the PG-13 for subsequent sequels. But really, T2 almost lends itself to doing that. The fact that it's so clean, is actually, again, another reason why maybe more people saw it than the original movie. I mean, the original movie was a success, obviously, but this movie, T2, eclipsed the original movie in terms of popularity and just box office in general. I mean,
it made $520 million. That's almost 4 times as much as its predecessor. Not a bad thing, because nearly $80 million against a near $7 million is still a big hit. But here we have nearly $600 million against a near $100 million here.
I mean, T2 easily has to be one of the top 10 most memorable and influential films of the 90s. And that's just, aside from what its technical and what its impact on culture and whatnot, but just also its success. I mean, there was something about this movie that just clicked for the mainstream. And again, it's just funny that whenever Hollywood tried to pursue that with later sequels, it just wasn't received the same way that T2 was. But again, that's a discussion in itself. But still, to your point, I think that cleanness kind of lends itself to an accessibility that the gritty grunge of the original movie, or any of the subsequent movies that kind of tapped into that, it just doesn't have that same feel, so it's not talked about.
Come back, Trev.
Am I better?
Yep, yeah, you're good now. So, final thoughts on Terminator 2.
Oh, well, real quick, I just wanted to second that your nitpicks like about Sarah, and I kind of brought up some nitpicks about the effects. Those also kind of factored into mine, just as a wrap up on that. So my final thoughts. It's funny. I thought I was going to be kind of not the devil, kind of be the bad cop for this situation. But I'm actually glad that I rewatched the movie, because it's actually been a while. And I just kind of rediscovered the fact that. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Well, same for me. It'd been a while since I watched T2 as well.
Oh yeah. Well, I just rediscovered that. I actually do like this movie. I mean, I will say that I love it. I also love it. I still prefer the first one in some respects, but really, the first two Terminator movies are like neck and neck with each other. I mean, those are the Cameron classics. They're the ones that define the franchise, and even if you argue that the franchise never reclaimed that glory, not that it had to, in my opinion anyway, this one and its predecessor are the trendsetters, and there's a good chance most of our listeners probably have seen this already. This is a very popular movie. But even if you haven't seen the first two Terminators, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Come on. Yeah, what are you doing? Just come on, find them, watch them. T2 isn't as accessible as the first movie in terms of watching it for free. But I mean, just come on, buy this movie. It's worth owning. Yeah, and I'm glad that we did this review, because I've rediscovered my appreciation for it. The fandom shouldn't dictate whether or not I like a movie.
It shouldn't dictate whether or not anybody likes a movie. Like, they need to stop fucking gatekeeping, because that's exactly what they're doing.
Well, before we did this review, I was going to say that the way you feel about, say, like The Empire Strikes Back is how I feel about T2, but I don't think that's the case anymore. Yeah, I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10, even with its nitpicks. It's not enough to really detract from the experience. An all-time classic that actually is going to turn 30 this July, so it's getting up there, but it's still very watchable.
My final thoughts: Terminator 2 is a masterpiece. It's certainly one of the greatest sequels of all time, one of the greatest movies of all time, and is one of my favorite films of my entire life. I adore this movie. It's endlessly rewatchable. It's highly entertaining. It's very nostalgic. I just love the absolute shit out of this movie. It is a very special film to my heart. Which is why, of course, what the hell else am I going to be giving it? I am giving Terminator 2 Judgment Day a perfect, solid gold 10 out of 10. It is a masterpiece of modern cinema.
Hey, you could give it a 20 out of 20. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, if I could, I would. So that'll about do it for this review of Terminator 2. Post your comments down below. Let me know what you think, and hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video. Huh?
You didn't ask him what he rates it.
He already told me.
Okay, I thought you were.
And share this video with your friends. And as always, everyone, next week, stay here. I'll be back.